Hi, I'm Kayla, and this is the story of how everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled in the blink of an eye. I had always thought my life was on track. I had a steady job as a barista at a local cafe, a job I loved because it allowed me to interact with people, to feel like I was a part of something bigger than myself. It wasn't the most glamorous work, but it was enough to pay the bills and keep me grounded. My apartment was small, but it was mine. I'd worked hard to pay the rent each month to keep it clean and organized. I'd made a home for myself in that little place filled with memories and things I loved. And that, to me, was all I needed. I didn't ask for much, just a little peace and stability. Then there was Alex. He was the man I had fallen in love with. We had been together for almost 2 years, and in that time he became everything to me. He was ambitious, driven, and charming. He made me believe in something bigger, something better for our future. We talked about moving in together, about one day buying a house, about starting a life that would be built on love and mutual respect. We even made plans to visit places, to see the world together. It all seemed perfect. My life, my relationship, my plans for the future. I believed in Alex and the future we had talked about so many times. He was my rock, the person I thought I could always rely on. But things started to shift without me realizing it. One afternoon, Alex came to me with what seemed like a simple proposition. He had found a new apartment, a bigger one that we could move into together. He spoke about how we would build a future there, and I was excited about the idea of taking the next step with him. He asked me to sign the lease but assured me everything was already set up. At the time it seemed like a good decision. I trusted Alex. He assured me that everything would be fine, that it was just a formality. I signed the lease without a second thought. It wasn't until later that I realized I had signed something far more important than I had understood. I didn't think to question it. I was in love. He had been the one to find the place. I thought, why would he ever do anything to hurt me? But I should have asked more questions. I should have been more careful. The reality didn't hit me until months later. One evening, after a long shift at the cafe, I came home to an eviction notice taped to the door. My heart dropped when I saw it. Confused and alarmed, I called Alex, but he didn't answer. I had no idea what was going on. I quickly checked the mail and found more alarming notices. The rent hadn't been paid for months. Not a single cent. I was suddenly faced with the harsh truth. I had been living under a lie, and I had no idea how deep it ran. That's when I found out the truth and my world began to crumble. Alex hadn't just used my name to sign the lease. He'd been renting the apartment out to someone else without telling me. He hadn't been paying the rent, and I had no idea. He'd used me, my name, my trust, to secure a place he didn't even plan to live in himself. I was left holding the bag with no warning, no explanation, and no way out. Everything I thought I had built, everything I thought I knew had been stolen from me. The moment the eviction notice hit, I was numb. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. The apartment I thought was mine, the one we had discussed as the foundation of our future, was no longer a safe place. It was just a place I had paid for without even knowing the true deal behind it. I waited for Alex to come home that evening, hoping for some kind of explanation, some comfort in the chaos. But when he finally walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. His demeanor was off. He didn't seem surprised or even worried. He seemed calm. "Alex, what's going on? Why did we get an eviction notice?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and anger. He looked at me for a moment, his eyes cold. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said, almost as if he were talking to a child. "You never deserved that house. You were just a temporary step, and now it's over." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My mind raced as I tried to process them. "Temporary step? Over? You're kidding, right?" I said, my voice trembling with disbelief. "What are you talking about? I've paid every month. I've been here with you. I thought we were building something together." Alex shook his head, a smirk crossing his face. "It wasn't ever about you, Kayla. It was always about me getting what I wanted. You think you're special? You're just someone to use until I'm done with you." Those words burned through me. I had been so blind, so trusting. I had given everything to him and he had taken it all, using me for his own benefit. I realized then that I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. The man I loved, the one I had believed in, had been using me from the start. I stared at him, speechless, the reality of his betrayal sinking in. My chest tightened as I tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. It was all too much. "I can't believe this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You used me. You lied to me. And now I have nothing." He didn't care. He didn't even flinch. He just turned and walked out the door, leaving me in the mess he had created. But I wasn't going to let it end like this. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. That night, I sat in the empty apartment, surrounded by the remains of a life I had thought was mine. But in the midst of the overwhelming pain, something clicked inside me. I wasn't going to let Alex win. I wasn't going to be a victim of his lies. I grabbed my phone and started researching. I called a lawyer. I wasn't sure how, but I knew I had to fight for what was mine. I wasn't just going to let him walk away from this without facing the consequences of what he'd done. That was the turning point. It wasn't just about losing the apartment anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. And I would make sure that the truth came to light. Alex would have to pay for the mess he'd made. I wasn't going to let him win. The next few weeks were a blur. I spent sleepless nights sorting through legal documents, trying to figure out what to do next. It was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't just let Alex get away with this. He had used me, lied to me, and left me homeless. I needed justice. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in fraud and tenant rights. After hearing my story and reviewing the evidence, he quickly told me, "This isn't just about an eviction. This is a case of fraud. He used your name and manipulated you. We can take action." That was the first time I felt like I had some control over the situation. Alex thought he could ruin my life and walk away without consequences, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I gathered everything I could find: texts, emails, the lease, and any proof that Alex had been lying to me. It was painstaking, but I needed every piece of evidence to fight back. The hardest part was confronting the truth. I had trusted Alex with everything, and he had used that trust to exploit me. He had manipulated me into thinking I was building a life with him, when in reality I was just a means to an end. It hurt more than I ever thought possible, but I knew I had to move forward. One day I walked into the courthouse, shaking but determined. My heart pounded as I waited for the trial to begin. This wasn't just about getting an apartment back or trying to recover the money I'd lost. It was about standing up for myself, about taking back my dignity. This was my fight for my future. As the legal proceedings went on, more details about Alex's past came to light. It turned out he had used other people's names to sign leases and commit fraud. He had borrowed money from people, never intending to repay it, and had been living a lie the entire time. I wasn't the only one he had taken advantage of. I received a message from him once, trying to convince me to drop the case. "Kayla, you don't have to do this. We can fix everything. We can get back to where we were," he wrote. But I wasn't buying it anymore. His manipulation didn't work. I knew exactly who he was now, and I wasn't going to let him control me. The case dragged on, but I kept pushing forward. I refused to be a victim. I kept fighting for what was right. Slowly I started to feel the anger and hurt fade. I wasn't going to let those emotions control me anymore. I was taking back my life, piece by piece, and nothing was going to stop me. Months later, I received the news I had been waiting for. Alex was being held accountable for his actions. The court ruled in my favor. He had to pay for the damage he caused, both financially and emotionally. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the apartment. It was about making sure he faced the consequences of his lies. Finally, I could breathe. The weight that had been crushing me for so long was lifted. I had fought for myself and I had won. Alex's deceit was exposed for everyone to see, and he had to pay for what he did to me and others. With the case behind me, I moved into a small new apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It felt like freedom. I had learned so much through all of this, about trust, about betrayal, and about myself. It was a painful journey, but one that made me stronger. I wasn't the same person I was before all of this happened. I was more resilient, more determined, and more aware of my worth. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I was ready. I had rebuilt my life, and this time I would make sure I built it the right way. The day the judgment came down, I felt like I could finally exhale. After months of battling in court, fighting for my rights, and reliving every painful detail of what Alex had done to me, it was finally over. Alex was held accountable for his actions, and he couldn't run from the truth anymore. When the court ruled in my favor, it wasn't just a victory in terms of finances. It was a victory over the lies and manipulation that had nearly destroyed me. He was ordered to pay restitution for the damages he caused, not only to me but to others he had deceived as well. The news spread fast, and it wasn't long before people from his past began reaching out to me, sharing their own stories of how they'd been wronged by him. I remember the day I saw him again. It wasn't in court but on the street as I was walking home from my new job. I didn't even recognize him at first. His arrogance, his smug attitude, the way he carried himself like nothing had ever happened. He saw me before I saw him, and for a split second I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew I knew. He knew that the walls were closing in on him. I didn't say a word to him, didn't even look his way. I just walked past with my head held high, knowing that the worst part was over. He tried to reach out after that. Texts, emails, calls. He wanted to apologize, wanted me to forgive him, but I couldn't. There was nothing left for me to forgive. He had taken so much, and he couldn't take any more from me. The only thing left for me to do was to keep moving forward and leave him in the past where he belonged. Alex wasn't the only one who had to pay the price for his actions. His reputation, the carefully constructed persona he had worked so hard to build, was shattered. I watched as his life crumbled around him. The friends he thought would back him turned their backs. The people who once trusted him no longer believed in him. And for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about finding closure, about knowing that I had fought back against the lies he told, and that I hadn't let him walk away unscathed. I didn't need him to face the consequences for me to heal. What mattered was that I had taken control of my own life again. With the case behind me, I focused on rebuilding what I had lost and more. I started to save money, got a better job, and found a sense of independence that I hadn't realized I had been missing. Every step forward felt like a small victory, but together they added up to something far greater than what I had before. I finally felt like myself again, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The road to get there hadn't been easy, but I had learned to rely on myself. The betrayal, the pain, and the hardship didn't define me anymore. What defined me now was my ability to rise from the ashes and move forward, no matter how dark the past had been. I had a life to live, and this time I would live it on my own terms. It wasn't the end of my journey, but it was the beginning of a new chapter. One that I would write myself, filled with strength, independence, and the freedom to choose my own path. And this time no one would take that from me. The months that followed were transformative. With the weight of the legal battle lifted from my shoulders, I started to rebuild my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I would ever fully heal from the betrayal I'd experienced. But with every small step I began to find myself again. I moved into a modest but cozy apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that meant everything. The first time I walked through the door of my new place, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't just escaping the past, I was creating something new. A place where I could finally feel safe, where I could breathe again. The first few weeks in my new apartment were quiet. It was a time for reflection, a time for me to figure out who I really was now that I had shed the weight of Alex's lies. I spent hours sorting through my belongings, unpacking and getting everything in order. As I placed a few pictures on the walls and arranged my furniture, it felt like I was putting pieces of myself back together. I also started to focus on my career. I had been working at the cafe for a while, but with everything that had happened I realized I needed something more. I had the skills, the determination and the drive to do more with my life. So, I pushed myself to apply for new job opportunities, knowing that if I wanted to move forward, I had to step out of my comfort zone. It wasn't long before I found a new job in a small marketing firm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. The work was challenging, but it excited me. It gave me a sense of purpose beyond just surviving. I was thriving. One of the most surprising things that came from all of this was the friendships I developed along the way. I had always been a little guarded, afraid of letting people in too easily after what happened with Alex. But through the support of coworkers, new friends I met in the neighborhood, and even strangers who reached out to share their own stories, I realized that people were capable of so much kindness. They weren't all like Alex. I had been so focused on my pain and anger for so long that I had forgotten there were people who cared, people who saw me for who I truly was. And slowly I let them in. Looking back, I can see now how far I've come. The pain from the betrayal still lingers in the background, but it no longer defines me. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I've learned that life can take away everything you hold dear, but it can also offer you a new chance, a new beginning if you're willing to fight for it. As I stood in front of my apartment one evening, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I had come through the storm. I had faced my fears, my failures, and my broken trust. But I had survived. And now I was ready for the next chapter, one I would write with my own hands. I may have lost a lot, but in the process I gained something far more valuable. My independence, my strength, and the knowledge that I can rebuild my life from scratch no matter how many times it's torn down. The journey was never easy, but it was mine. And I was finally free. I'd spent so much time in the past looking backward, trying to make sense of the betrayal, trying to understand how everything went so wrong. But now I was done with that. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to embrace the calm. In the months that followed, I grew into a version of myself I hadn't known existed. It wasn't just about rebuilding what I'd lost. It was about finding new opportunities, new dreams, and a new path for myself. I started to embrace the independence I'd long ignored, focusing on the things I'd always put aside because I was too busy trying to make someone else happy. One of the first things I did was take a solo trip to the coast. I had always dreamed of visiting the ocean, but somehow, the idea always seemed too distant, like it was something I couldn't afford or didn't have time for. But this time I wasn't waiting. I packed a bag, took a deep breath, and bought a bus ticket. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the need to explain my actions to anyone. It was just me, the open road, and the sea. The trip was transformative. Standing on the edge of the cliffs, feeling the salt air in my lungs, and watching the waves crash against the rocks, I realized how much power I had in my own hands. The world wasn't as small as I had once thought. There was so much more out there waiting for me, and I had all the time in the world to explore it. When I came back, I realized I was no longer the same person who had walked out of the courtroom months ago. The hurt was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. I had found a sense of peace in knowing that I had done everything I could to make things right, and that Alex could never take away my ability to move forward. Back at my apartment, I began to get more involved in my community. I volunteered at local shelters, helping others who were facing homelessness just as I once had. The work gave me a sense of purpose, and every time I helped someone else, I reminded myself how far I'd come. It also helped me heal in a way that nothing else could. Helping others made me realize that there was so much more to life than the pain I'd carried. It wasn't just about career changes or new friendships. It was about my relationship with myself. I started taking better care of my physical and emotional health. I joined a yoga class, something I had always been curious about but never thought I could do. I started writing more, journaling my thoughts, my fears, and my progress. With every new experience, I felt stronger and more centered. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I wasn't afraid of what might come next, because I knew that I could handle anything life threw my way. I had been tested and I had survived. I had learned the hard way, but in the end it made me stronger. The most defining moment of this new chapter came one night when I was sitting at my favorite cafe sipping on a cup of coffee. I had a moment of clarity, a moment when I realized how far I had come. I was no longer weighed down by the past. I wasn't the girl who had been betrayed, who had been left on the streets, who had lost everything. I was someone new, someone who had rebuilt from the ground up, someone who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet. For the first time I felt completely free. Free from the pain. Free from the fear. Free from the memories that once held me hostage. I had taken my life back. And I was proud of who I had become. Now looking ahead, I see a future full of possibilities. I'm no longer defined by my past, but by the strength I've found within myself. Every new step I take brings me closer to the life I've always wanted. And this time it's on my terms. I don't know exactly where life will take me next, but I know that I'm ready for it. No matter what comes my way, I will face it head on. Because I've already survived the worst and now I'm living for the best. The best is yet to come. And I'm ready.